Hey everyone, welcome in. I've made a brand new build that I'm calling Omnistorm. Now this build uses a brand new Necromancer Unique Lidless Wall, as well as some of the best parts of Infinimist and also Blight. In the season, we'll also have automatic corpse explosion and corpse tendril casting, so the stacks of Shadowblight will go even higher. The main interaction this build requires is spawning Bone Storms infinitely. Each Bone Storm stacks Shadowblight because they all work with the ultimate Shadow aspect. Even better, every Bone Storm is also stacking our shield constantly with the Shielding Storm aspect, giving us incredible survivability. The way we can keep these Bone Storms going is by continually spawning them by casting Blight, Corpse Explosion, or any other ability. This allows us to even have Bone Storms active while our own Bone Storm on our skill bar is on cooldown. This lets us chain Bone Storm after Bone Storm together and blitz through a dungeon, leaving enemies to die behind us to shadow damage over time. We can easily pixel pull enemies with Blight and Aspect of the Void, which keeps them crowd controlled and also keeps us safe. The extra Bone Storms can also layer on top of each other in your own Bone Storm, and when they do so, the damage absolutely wrecks enemies, even pre-season without Malignants. You can have up to 5 total Bone Storms, with 4 Bone Storms on the ground and 1 on your character cast from your own character's ability. Alright, so here's my level 100 hardcore Necromancer. We're going to show you all the gear that you need and the skills that you need. So first, let's go into the skill tree. For the skills, first, your basic skill, you don't use your basic skill. 2 skill points anywhere will go fine. For Blight, you're going to go 5 out of 5 Blight, and you're going to go all the way to Supernatural Blight. You're going to do 3 out of 3 Hued Flesh. You're going to do 2 points into Corpse Explosion all the way to Blighted Corpse Explosion. Then you're going to do 5 out of 5 Blood Mist to Ghastly Blood Mist. 1 point into Grim Harvest, Fueled by Death, 3 out of 3. You're going to do Death's Embrace, 3 out of 3. Amplify Damage, 3 out of 3. Decrepify to Aberrant Decrepify, 1 point. Corpse Tendrils, 1 point to Plagued Corpse Tendrils for the vulnerable. You're going to grab Reaper's Pursuit, Gloom, and Terror. Now you can actually take that point down here from Corpse Explosion. I might actually do that just for the movement speed, but you can kind of move those points back and forth between Reaper's Pursuit and Corpse Explosion, depending on if you need movement speed or damage. 1 point into Crippling Darkness. And then we're going to max out Bone Storm here all the way to Supreme Bone Storm. 3 out of 3 Standalone, 3 out of 3 Memento Mori. And then our main damage dealer is actually Shadowblight here. You might think that Blight is our main damage dealer, but actually Blight just helps us stack Shadowblight even faster. All right, let's go into the equipment. On the helm, we have the Explosive Mist aspect. This is going to help us trigger Corpse Explosion in a pinch if we really, really need it. But most importantly, it's going to keep our Blood Mist cooldown 2.5 seconds lower whenever we trigger this and keep us alive. Staying alive is pretty important. We're going to continue to use Disobedience. Regardless of the nerf, it's still very, very good. For our hands, we're going to use Howl from Below. Now, this is going to be more important on the season when we're automatically casting Corpse Explosion. On the footage, on the gameplay that I just showed you, the Corpse Explosions weren't really going off unless I was manually casting them. But once you are automatically casting them, those corpses need to actually go find their targets. So having Howl from Below is super, super important for the build. We're going to be using Shielding Storm. This is critical for the build. You won't be able to stay alive unless you have Shielding Storm. On the boots, now I'm using the Aspect of the Void in order to get that pixel pull or the suck in, whatever you want to call it, from Blight. You don't have to use that if you don't want that constant CC. You can use a movement speed aspect here for speed farming if you really wanted to, something like Ghostwalker or the new aspect, I forget what it's called, that allows you to move 40% movement speed when you slow or chill enemies. I might be actually using that one on the season just for speed farming instead of Void. For the wand, or for the weapon, I'm using Ultimate Shadow. This got a huge buff on the patch. It's doing a lot more damage now, but still it's not a significant amount of damage. Shadowblight is still the main damage source. For the amulet, we're throwing Blighted on there. 180x is still very killer as far as damage goes. We're using Decay on one of the rings. And on the other ring, we're using MAXROLL. I have a 4 MAXROLL here, so every time I cast Blight, it basically regenerates itself. It just recharges constantly. And then finally, on the offhand, we're using Lidless Wall. This is, of course, really required. This is a hard requirement for the build in order to make sure that we're constantly spawning those bone storms everywhere that we go. All right, everyone, let's take a look at the Paragon boards. Now, I reserve the right to optimize these later, change them later. Paragon boards can be a really changey kind of thing. So this is sort of the best that I have right now. Let's take a look at this. So first, we start with exploit. Now, we're going to do exploit on this board because later on we're going to put essence on a different, better dex board. Essence is the better of the two here, but exploit is still pretty good. We are going to make things vulnerable with corpse tendrils here. We do go ahead and pick up these maximum life nodes later on. But when you first come through these boards, let me just highlight this real quick. When you first come through these boards, there's a couple things you're going to pick up. You're going to pick up exploit first. You're going to blitz out of this board. You might ignore some of this damage. You might take it first. It kind of depends on you. You're going to grab Wither. Wither is a really important source of shadow damage. You're going to come up and you're going to route all the way up here. You're going to pick up Scourge. That's important. And then one of the very important things that you do is that you exit through the right side here and you pick up the Flesh Eater node. Now we also get the Control node here, which is another 20x, but Flesh Eater is 40x multiplier. So this is very, very important, especially early on. You're actually not going to have a 4 MAXROLL here. So you're going to be running out of essence as you're leveling with Blight, and you're going to be casting Corpse Explosion a lot more often until you have a way to autocast Corpse Explosion. So Flesh Eater is just always going to be good for you, whether you're autocasting it later on or whether you are manually casting it early on when you don't have your 4 MAXROLL all set up yet. Anyway, so on Flesh Eater, we're going to do Control. We're maxing out all of the intelligence on Control here because Control is just so powerful. It's 75 intelligence on this board. It's so, so good. Yeah, we go through whether, and if you want to see the particulars of how I've routed the board here, you can of course check the description below for the planner, and you can route the same way that I did if you just don't want to think about it too much. Of course, for the next board, we're going to attach Scent of Death. Scent of Death, of course, really, really good because we're using corpses in this build. We're getting that extra damage reduction. We're getting the increased damage when we first start an engagement. I really like starting on this side of the board because we get that critical strike damage, and then we can kind of route through the middle here. And when we do that, we're going to get this glyph socket, and we're putting darkness in this glyph socket. Now, notice this glyph socket here, 49 willpower. This glyph socket here, 54 willpower. So darkness is actually the more important glyph to prioritize in terms of min-maxing out all of the willpower on this board. We also pick up the really important damage to healthy node here. Ruin with crit strike damage and all this sort of thing. Super, super important. All right, then we exit out of this side of the board, and we're going to pick up Essence. Now, Essence no longer just applies for core skills, it applies to all skills, which means it also applies to Shadowblight. So that's going to increase those crit strikes with Shadowblight and bring those to new heights. Now, you might say, okay, well, why are you picking up damage while fortified? We don't use fortified. Actually, we're just picking up the dex nodes here. So you can kind of ignore this. These are kind of dead nodes. We get the 10 intelligence, whatever, makes up for it. But we're picking up the 14 dex here just to pump up essence even more. We're just min-maxing this glyph here. And one other thing I'd like to point out about Paragon board optimization, something that I've learned Paragon boards are really, really hard to optimize, is something that I like to call exit cost. So when you pick up a node, when you pick up like a glyph, right? A lot of times you go to pick up a legendary node or a glyph on a board, then you pick up all the maximum amount of those nodes, and then you have like whatever's left over. So what does it cost you to exit the board? In this case, on Wither, we have a 5 exit cost from 2 different gates. And 5 as an exit cost in general is just pretty cheap. You'll see a lot of boards like Flesh Eater, for example. If I go here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I guess that one's 5 as well. But a lot of times, like if I go over here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a very expensive exit cost. There's one more thing for us to look at, and that is the sacrifices. So we're sacrificing all 3 minions for this build. For the first sacrifice, we're sacrificing Reapers for the increased shadow damage. Second sacrifice is Cold Mages for the vulnerable damage. And the third sacrifice is, of course, the Iron Golem for the critical strike damage. All right, that's going to be it for this one. I hope y'all really enjoyed this build. I'm going to be actually running this build on the season on my hardcore character that I am racing solo self-found to 100 when the season starts. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.